question for everyone who's joining us. One of the questions in the New Zealand Menopause Survey that Linda is the author of was about how people's symptomatic experience had affected their work, if it had, and how. And so this little piece of data, for those of you that have been reading ahead, was included in the submission that Linda put together for our Menopause Collective Aotearoa New Zealand. It was concluded in there, the submission for the Women's Health Strategy. So if you had a look at that, you may have the answer. What percentage of people said that yes, their symptoms had adversely affected their job? What percentage? Pop the number in the chat now. What do you reckon? What percentage? So we've got 87, 70, 75, 60, 80, 195% of people, somebody said. 99, 25%, 30. Yeah, so we're having a really wide range of suggestions. I won't say guesses, I'll say suggestions from the group about what it was. And the last person, Claire Stewart, of course you're going to get it right, Claire, is 83%. So 83% of people, let's just rest our attention on that, right? And there were a range of options that people were given, weren't there, Linda, about, and they could choose more than one in terms of the ways in which it had affected them. What are some of the observations that you have about how people answered that question, you know, in terms of the way it has affected their job, not just the number of people for whom it has affected?
Yeah, so the breakdown, the options, you know, were different ones to say. The most general one was, has your job now been made harder to do than before? And that was the one that most people ticked, that in some way it is just harder than it was. And then there was more specific things, as in, you know, have you had to take time off, which is either just the odd day or longer days? And then more sort of drastic things like, I've had to permanently reduce my hours, I've had to change my role, I've turned down a promotion was one of the options. And to the point of people saying, I've actually considered leaving my job, or I have actually left my job. And, you know, 1 in 6 women said they have thought about leaving their job. Which is a lot, and I hear that a lot from patients. You know, they sort of say, I don't think I can do it anymore. It's kind of a loss of confidence as well, a lot of the time, whether their abilities are different or not, but they feel like they almost don't have that same confidence level anymore. And then 1 in 12 women actually tick the box to say, I did leave my job. So that's a lot of women for whom the adverse effect is so bad that they can't continue in their role, or they feel like they can't continue in their role.
Yeah,
and we're losing them.
And it's very much in line, because everyone who's joining us, there were 4,282 respondents to this survey. That makes it the same sized pool of human beings offering data into this soup as they've had in similar surveys in Australia and the UK, both of which obviously have populations significantly larger than New Zealand. So one of the things for me is New Zealand people experiencing this want their voices to be heard, and they want something to be done about it in numbers that per capita of population far outstrip our cousins across the ditch and on the other side of the world, who, particularly in the UK, one would argue are ahead of us. There's a very loud chorus, isn't there, from New Zealand women and people experiencing this to say we want more done about it.
Yes, and that's kind of the feeling I had, which is why I started the survey. It's kind of like it's not being spoken about, but people want to say it. And they want to be given a vehicle to do that on, because it is, you know, a bit taboo. And it is one of those topics that can make some people feel a bit uncomfortable or a bit awkward, or, you know, should we talk about it? Should we not? But I think most women do want to talk about it. And I mean, that survey I wrote, it was quite long, you know, I was thinking, is this too long? Who's going to sit and fill this in? And the average time for completion when I looked on the stats was 18 minutes, on average. I mean, some people took longer than that, some people took less than that, but that's a good 20 minutes of a woman sitting down, taking the time to go through all of those questions and often write some free text, because there's so much bubbling inside, in this phase of our life, and we don't feel like we get much opportunity to tell it to people, to the people who matter as well. That's the thing. It's like, who's listening? So it does reflect that. And as you say, we are a smaller country than these big boys out there, the UK and Aussie. But this is a chunky load of data. It shows there are a lot of women out there who have got something to talk about and got a story to tell, and it needs to come out of the closet, really, and lift the lid on it, good, bad, and the ugly on this phase of life. And it's not all doom and gloom. We can sort of get a bit dragged down that road, can't we? There are positive aspects to this life phase as well, but we've been ignoring the negatives, I think, for too long. And the good thing about the survey is it shines a light on it, lifts the lid.
And I think the thing for me, working in the space of change and transformation and understanding how the brain works and all the rest of it, as you do, our minds tend to go to the negative stuff and the things that are threatening and different and everything about an experience in the first instance anyway. And so we've kind of got to deal with that. And it's okay to go, what's all the negative shit associated with this? Because then we're not making up stories about our experience and imagining things might come from an even worse source than perimenopause or menopause.
Yes.
And go.
That happens, doesn't it? There's a lot of these symptoms that are quite frightening, and they can have other things or other causes. So that's, but if you lift the lid on them, then you realize then they're not frightening. But you're right, we've got to embrace the stuff that makes us feel uncomfortable. Anything negative, it's not just menopause, any other negative emotion or negative experience. If you try and bury it, it's just going to fester. And it's gonna find its way out somehow, and it's usually going to come out in some real unhelpful, unhealthy way. So even if it does feel uncomfortable, or we're not sure if it's, because the other criticism often is, if we make too much of a fuss about how hard it is, we're going to look weak, and that's another argument that's put up against, should we be making all this noise about menopause? I think we probably should. And as you say, it's the good parts and the bad parts. It's the whole picture, because human beings are messy creatures, whatever gender they are and whatever stage they're at. So it's just embracing what being a human is all about.
Absolutely.
The shiny bits and the not so shiny bits, basically.
So how did you stumble into this, or deliberately make your way into this space? You've got the formal qualifications behind this, plus a whole swag of other aligned and important pieces to add to the picture. Why become a menopause specialist?
It's one of those, I think most of us who work in this space, from whatever bit of it we're in, we probably 20 years ago didn't have it on our, when I grow up, I want to be but as with most things in life, it's when something comes along and smacks you in the chops yourself, that you really start to give it more attention. So I had my own, personal perimenopause start and journey. And at that time, I was a GP who was also seeing lots of women around the same age as me and older than me, struggling with the same sorts of things. So it was for me, it was personally relevant that this is kind of hard, and what can we do about this? So that motivated me to start looking into it more, for me, but also for all the women I was seeing. And then as a GP, you're trying to cram so much into so little time, so many people at each day. It is hard to do most health conditions well in that 15-minute conveyor belt. I don't know who invented that. That was probably a man. Sorry, men, but it probably was. Women's health doesn't fit into 15 minutes, not much of it at all does. But then perimenopause and menopause, really doesn't cram into that convenient little time box. So I just started to think, I wonder if I just offered women something else, just set something else that is specifically about this, that has
Mm.
time, because often time is the enemy. We're rushing around all day anyway, trying to juggle too much. And then you finally sit with the doctor and you feel rushed again.
Yeah.
So then I just decided to just set a clinic up. I was like, right, I'm just gonna just give it a go. I was joining all these menopause societies, learning more myself, did the NAMS qualification, and then just put this out there and sort of said, is anyone interested in this? And yes, they were. I had people wanting appointments. So there is that need for specialist and longer duration interactions with healthcare professionals, and not just doctors either.
No.
The whole package of what women need to learn about their bodies and brains, specifically at this point in their life, and all that other stuff I did. The scenic route I took to where I am now, has been really helpful and is really helpful for perimenopause and menopause, because there's so much lifestyle in it. There's so much psychology in it. So, I can use my clinic and the extra time with the woman to do more than just talk about the medicine and the biology bit. So now, even though, as I say, 20 years ago, I wouldn't have said, when I grow up, I'm going to be a menopause doctor. Now I look back and say, everything I've done has kind of led me here.
Mm.
And my sister said it to me recently. She's a little bit older than me. She's in her late 40s. And she said, Lynn, this is what you're supposed to do. This is your calling.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel like that. And I think a lot of us who get into this space feel that as well. It really does feel like an important, good thing to do.
Particularly at this time, I feel like for our generation, and I say our, I'm going to be 54 next month. Gen X and the older millennials in the room, because this can hit you anytime, right? It's a stage, not an age thing. It does tend to be an age, but I think all of us feel like there's a real moment in time happening. And of course, there's a wave that's rising around people wanting to cash in on this, which is one of the reasons that, in terms of your work and the work of everyone who's working in this space, why it's really important we elevate the conversation in workplaces so women are more informed and more supported and less at risk of the snake oil salesman. That if they go, and women, because a lot of them are going to be women coming with things that are apparently going to make it better and won't. They just want to take your cash. Having doctors who are educated, informed, and have the capacity to sit with and identify what's really going on for the person in front of them. We've got several people in the chat making comments about relatively recent experiences, or one today, in fact, where they've had a shitty 15-minute appointment, or they've spent lots of money and lots of time not getting the support. So education and appropriate education in schools, not all of it necessarily, in the workplace, and support and awareness, because when we know what's going on, we're less afraid, we're better able to understand it and make accommodations, temporary accommodations. We do not want women leaving the workforce permanently or stepping down permanently. And seeing doctors who are informed and can support them so that they get the right advice around lifestyle change, because a lot can be done with that, and pharmaceutical support as appropriate. God knows, progesterone has changed my life. Apart from the estradiol, estrogen, I'd be absolutely screwed without it. So what sparked the idea of doing a survey, of going out there and seeing if you could get people to answer these enormous number of questions about all aspects of menopause, including the little talked about but very important surgical menopause? So, because it's not always a natural transition, team. Lots of women end up having this situation forced upon them suddenly, violently, and early. So when you think, I'm going to write a menopause survey.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. You just come up with ideas, don't you? And they grow legs. No, it was because like most things, if you don't have numbers and data, nobody's going to listen, are they? That's the sad fact. And I'd listened to so many stories one-to-one, and it was like, look, these all need to come together, and then there can be a power behind it. Then, you know, bring all of these individual stories together, give them some power, give them that unified voice. So then it is more obvious that this is not, that this is something big. This is affecting a lot of people. There are a fair number of those people struggling, and they don't need to be. You know, that's the real point. So I thought, right, we need some numbers. So it was sort of a month or so before World Menopause Day last year, which was in October, that I was really like, right, I'm cracking on it. I'm going to get this survey out on World Menopause Day. So then it was a case of sitting down, writing the questions, because without numbers, we're not going to get listened to, or it just sounds like a bunch of women moaning. You know, it's like, well, no, we need the numbers to show this is a lot of us who are going through it, you know, and parts of it are difficult, but we need to come together, if you like. You know, everyone comes into my room or into one of my consults, and it's one at a time. It's private, obviously. It's doctor and patient. And then when I physically would see her in GP lounge, they kind of put the brave face back on, and they go back out into the waiting room. They go back out into the world with that brave face on, you know, juggling and struggling. And it's kind of like we need to start taking that brave face off a little bit more, as hard as that is, and to recognize there's others out there with similar stories, and if we come together, we can make things better.
Yeah, I think the data is important. I mean, my neck of the woods in terms of the menopause awareness and support is about its place in the leadership conversation and in workplaces. And we have, you know, menopausal women generally described as 45 to 55. We know it extends around the edges of that, are the fastest growing workforce demographic on the planet. You know, in New Zealand, there are about 400,000 women in this age group in the workforce. And based on your, you know, 1 in 6 actually leaving, and was it 1 in 6?
1 in 6 thinking about leaving, 1 in 12 leaving.
Yeah, 1 in 12 actually leaving, and the data from the UK and Australia is 10% of women leaving the workforce early due to this, so it's still in the ballpark.
Yeah.
You know, that's a significant issue for New Zealand employers, for New Zealand society. It's part of what gives us a 20% gap in retirement savings. You know, we're talking about the pay gap, but the retirement savings gap is enormous. And if we have women leaving the workforce, stepping back permanently when it might only be temporary accommodations, etc., at any age, that's a problem for us as a country. And data helps, because we're often internally talking to decision makers and influencers who are like, have a bit of a show me the money approach, because it costs money, or they think it's going to, when it might not actually. There's a lot of provisions in most organisations already that we just need to talk about this and then direct people and say flexible working can be used for this. You've already got wellbeing leave or medical insurance, use it for these things. You know, there's all of these things. It doesn't have to cost more money. So when you think about the biggest surprises or the strongest messages that came to you from the voices of over 4,000 people with this experience, what were those big surprises or strong messages?
I suppose some of it was surprising to my sort of other people who maybe don't, you know all the ins and outs, especially with perimenopause and how sneaky that can be in terms of the most common symptoms that women were putting down. And this is why a lot of women don't recognize peri, and why a lot of doctors don't recognize peri, because those symptoms are not your classic ones. But it's fatigue. So there's two big things that came out that people are suffering with the most, and it's fatigue and sleep problems were the top ones.
Yeah.
And they're so general and vague, aren't they? You know,
particularly in the last few years with all the stress of COVID and everything that's been going on. That's why I didn't see it for ages. I'm like, oh, it's just COVID stress and this sort of thing, or burnout.
Yes, there's all these. I call Peri the great disguiser. It's like it's got its fake glasses and its fake mustache on, and it's like, oh, it's not Peri. I'm not Peri. I'm stress. I'm burnout.
Yeah.
I'm COVID. I'm this. I'm that. So it kind of hides behind so many other things, which is why it takes a while to realize actually maybe this is Peri. Is this my hormones? Not necessarily thinking about hormones and ovaries. When a woman has got symptoms like fatigue, or the other one is body pain. That was a really common symptom that came out with a high score, this sort of joint and muscle pain.
Yeah.
Especially in perimenopause. So it's like perimenopause hurts, frankly.
Yeah, it does.
There's all these symptoms they're not hot flushes, they're not period changes. So that came out in the stats as well, these sort of sneaky symptoms that are really bothersome, that are affecting women being able to get on with their busy lives, because, fatigue, pain, and not sleeping properly are not good for us. So I'd say that was kind of a biggie. And then the difference between the peri and the post-menopause, sort of some differences there, that you are on this journey, and they are different things. People sort of lump them together, or a lot of people have never even heard of the word perimenopause still. I think that's getting a bit more out there now. And it's not the same as menopause. And that's another way that in the medical world we can slip up a bit, because we have a blood test for menopause and we look for hot flushes and we look for periods either stopping or petering out. And if a woman doesn't tick any of those boxes, we might say to her, oh, this isn't your hormones, everything's normal. And then that woman goes away, things are not normal, something is not right, and she still hasn't got an answer. And it's because of that sneakiness of peri and but the change in symptoms. So you are in the data, it says, yes, the postmenopausal women were more likely to report having the classic hot flushes and night sweats. But they were a bit less likely to have the joint pain that you see really kicking off in peri.
Yeah.
So seeing those changes in symptoms, which explains why women go under the radar with this for quite a while. And that's what makes it kind of dangerous a bit, because if you don't know what's going on, how can you do anything about it?
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes just knowing what's going on makes you feel better. And if we can bring anxiety down, and this is true for any human being at any age, if you can bring anxiety down, you can make that person feel better, happier and healthier. And it's true with this phase, it's the mystery of it as well that can leave women feeling really quite alone and worried that something is wrong with them. And then it feeds into feeling even worse. And, to talk about this stuff at work or with someone at work, can be really difficult. Who do you talk to? How do you even bring it up? Do you want to single yourself out as struggling in some way? So all of that's acting against women to just sort of get on with it. They did a big study in Australia on the effect of menopause in work, and they did some interviews with women who worked in universities, and they said the main theme that came out of it that they got from all the women they interviewed was women just have to get on with it. We suck it up, and there is that resilience. It's quite amazing how much we do achieve despite our biology trying to make all this noise and nonsense in the background. We still get on with things quite a lot, with all the weird and not so wonderful things our body sometimes decides to do. But we have to bring our bodies to work with us. We can't leave them at home. We all bring our biology everywhere we go. And in a lot of ways, as you sort of mentioned, it doesn't have to be big and fancy and expensive, some of the things people can do at work. And in a way, a menopause-friendly workplace is kind of just a human-friendly one. because a lot of the things you put in place there is maybe like good temperature control, flexible working, an open culture where people do feel supported and able to go to someone, you know, particularly there might be someone who is a menopause champion or something. That's what they do a lot in English workplaces. Or just a general health champion who's got some knowledge of menopause. And all of that kind of stuff is good for everybody there, whatever gender or age they're at.
Yeah. So with that, what were some of the specific things that came out of the work-related questions? You had a whole section in there that had questions related to, we've talked about the effect on your job and the options people had there. You also asked people about whether they felt well supported by their employer or manager in terms of their symptoms at work. What came through there?
Yeah, so that wasn't great. You know, they don't basically. So when the question of, you know, how many people felt well supported, only 14% said.
1-4.
1-4.
1-4.
So clearly they're not feeling well supported. The other thing that came out is, out of people who have had to change their working environment in some way, either reducing their hours, or more dramatically leaving or whatever, one of the questions was, if you did any of those things, did you tell work that menopause was the reason? You know, even once you made those decisions, did you feel confident enough to say it was menopause? And only 15% said anything about menopause. You know, they would. And then I asked, what was the lie? You know, what did you say was the reason for that to happen, for you to make those changes? And the most common answer for the fake reason, if you like, was some sort of physical illness. You know, they would say some sort of physical illness instead of saying the word menopause, as if it's almost become a dirty word. And it needs to not be a dirty word. Basically, it needs to be something that women are comfortable to say and other people are comfortable to hear. That it isn't this dirty word that we would rather say we're stressed and burnt out or we're physically ill, rather than say, actually, this life phase is kicking me in the teeth. Because it is a temporary phase in a woman's life, isn't it? You know, that's the other thing to make workplaces aware of. Don't give up on us, I suppose. You know, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and with support, whatever that may be, there is a coming through of this to a better self often. And all of that experience that woman has, you know, can just be lost, because at the time when she is just needing a bit of extra help to keep afloat, you know, nobody threw her a lifeline, and that's she just needs something to cling on to for that time, and then she'll be back up and, you know, off like a rocket again.
Yeah, I think Natalie's put a comment in the because I've thought this too, Natalie. You know, temporary. You know, how temporary are we talking here? Temporary feels like a few weeks or something. When you kind of look at the information with perimenopause, the general comments in the literature are 5 to 10 years you can be in perimenopause, and this is with a conventional natural menopause as opposed to surgical where you slammed into it.
Yeah.
Right. So 5 to 10 years in peri. Well, menopause is just 12 months without a period. And then post-menopause is the rest of your life. And I've read in a number of places that the average time post-menopause that women experience symptoms is 7 years. So even if you took the average of the perimenopause, which is like 7.5 years, and a year for menopause, which is 8.5 years, and then the average of the others, which is 7 years, you know, we're still talking 15 years, not feeling terribly temporary.
It's true, but it's not permanent. It is longer than we'd like it to be, if we're honest. If we were going to redesign this whole female form, you know, there's a lot of things we'd change, really, isn't there? So yeah, it is a bit of a long sentence in lots of regards. You're right. You know, it would be better if it was all done and dusted a bit quicker. It does drag on. But then even within that time scale, it's not static either.
No, it goes like this, right? And HRT, if you are able to have it, and I know some women aren't, HRT, I have to say, it's changed my life in the past 12 months. So if you're sitting on the fence about whether to talk to your doctor about it, do it, because a whole lot of it can just disappear. Seriously.
And I mean, you know, that's one of those supports or options that got locked away in the breast cancer box a long time ago, unfortunately, and now is coming out of that box, as it should do, to be back on the table for women to choose from. Because that's the thing, there are lots of options out there that can make women feel better, get through this temporary but quite long phase of life, and sort of do it as nicely as possible, if you like. You know, there is going to be these turbulence though, and that's part of the confusion, is you think you're over one thing and then something else turns up as well. There's, like, I call them unwanted gifts.
Yeah.
All these symptoms, and you know, you can go a few years without one, and then suddenly one turns up that you thought you'd got away with, and you're like, oh, so it's my turn for that one now. Brilliant. So it is complicated, and it changes, and we need to acknowledge that. And I suppose in the workplace, that can almost make it seem even more of a difficult topic to try and get your head around, because it's a journey, but it doesn't need to be as rough as it often is. And that's what's sad, is when that woman hasn't had any sort of lifeline thrown at her, you know, to help her in that time when she really is just trying to keep her head above water, because everything's just getting a bit much. So
if we want to keep women in the workplace, and we do, don't we, team? Particularly as we have an aging workforce and a rapidly declining rate of fertility and births, which started dropping off in 2008, 2009 with the GFC. So population growth is not growing anymore. It's declining, particularly in this country. Some countries it's still growing, obviously. We're going to need to be in the workforce longer. We're going to need women to be bringing all of the magic they can into the workforce and keeping it there, particularly as we get into a place where we can bring midlife wisdom into our roles in leadership and in cultivating culture and guiding organisations, you know, play our part in guiding organisations through turbulent times. We really have to tackle this. There's a systemic level, but in the workplace in particular, this is not just a nice to have, this is the new edge. We've kind of dealt with navigating the period of fertility and childbirth for people who have that as part of their reality. Increasingly, women don't. Lots of women are having fewer children later or not having them at all. You know, I'm in the not at all department by circumstance and then by choice, but there are more and more of us. So this, for many of us, this is the first big thing. And it's the next big thing for women and organisations to be facing into. And it's not going away, because, I mean, every woman goes through it at a physical level, and about 80% of us have some degree of symptomatic impact, right? So what are your recommendations on what workplaces can and should and possibly must be doing? You know, what is it that you see based on the data and based on your professional experience and expertise? What is it that your recommendations are for organisations?
I mean, the first thing is to literally just make it not a dirty word anymore. I think, you know, so just make it okay. Bring that sort of just even step one awareness of mentioning it, talking about it a little bit. So for some that might be an awareness day or a talk, or just so as it just becomes something that is being mentioned and it's not stuck in the corner anymore. And it might be that some women don't want to talk about it that much. And I don't think we should, you know, force everybody to start telling their bosses and everyone they work with about what's going on for them. Some women won't want to talk about it, and that's fine as well. But that first step is to just make it okay to talk about this a little bit, to acknowledge it exists.
Yeah.
So then you take it out of the darkness. So that's something that's quite easy to do. Even if it can feel kind of awkward, it is usually not awkward after it's kind of been pulled out of its box. So that's the first thing. And then, information. So if you've got a staff intranet or something like that, where you can have some basic information about what menopause is, what are the symptoms, what are the possible treatments of all varieties of treatments, some basics like that are for staff, but also for managers and leaders as well, so they have got some notion of what this life phase is all about. Because it is just part of humanity. It is something that it happens to 50% of humans, so we should know about it. And then there's some, in England and other countries, there's been more talk about, should workplaces have a specific policy on it, or you can just bring it into existing sort of wellness policies, if you don't want to make a specific thing out of it. But, again, it's all about just acknowledging its existence and that it might have an impact on some people. And so they feel like it's a supportive environment. And that's good for culture, isn't it? That's just, that shows you care about the people working for you, and whatever bit of life they're currently in. And as you say, we are getting older, and we're working longer. So we do need to factor this into the workplace. We spend a lot of time at work.
Yeah.
We spend more waking hours there than at home a lot of the time. So it is, whether we like it or not, a bit like a second family. And like I said before, we can't leave our body and our womb at home. It's all coming with us everywhere we go. And if it's going to behave, we need to be supported to still get on with our goals and be successful, because it is all doable. There just might be some little changes. And then there's the work environment itself. And as I also said before, creating a menopause friendly work environment is kind of just a human friendly one. So it's not boiling hot. It's not, the temperature's all right. Giving people a bit of control over their own little environment really makes a difference as well. That Australian work survey a few years ago, that came out as being one of the things that made actually their symptoms more manageable and better. And then they perform better. So yes, from a financial point of view, it makes sense. So even silly little things, even a handheld fan or a desk fan, or a room where you can control the aircon, or access to a room where you can have a bit of a break, have a bit of a time out, a rest, the flexible working, maybe a meeting at 8 a.m. is not a great idea because you've not slept all night, but by 2 p.m., much better. Little changes like that are just acknowledging where that human is at in their life right now. And all of that can help carry us through what might be the turbulent time. And we're going to have good days and bad days, and we're not robots, and we never will be, and neither are men. We're all humans with all our colourful, messy, natural biology. So we can't go to work and turn into a robot or a machine. So having work environments that appreciate the fact that there's humans in there trying to function is good for men and women, really. And there was another thing that came out of the Aussie thing, is too much sitting down was particularly bad for menopause symptoms, as it is really for all human health. So finding ways for officers somehow to have, to move more, to move our bodies more. There's chairs everywhere, isn't there? It's just kind of everywhere you go, there's something to sit on. And we're not designed to sit so much. And in menopause, or too much sitting, can make everything a whole lot worse. So for people with sedentary jobs, even thinking of ways to make the workplace just more healthy anyway, in terms of more movement, healthy snacks instead of all the vending machines full of crap and the cakes in the kitchen, and just encouraging people to be kinder to their bodies is good for menopause, and it's good for everyone else who's there as well.
Great points. Now we have a small amount of time left for a bit of, if anyone has a question that they'd like to put to Linda. I see there are a couple there already, which we'll address while the rest of you are putting in your questions. If you've got one, just open up the Q&A, pop your question in. If you don't have a question, please still go and have a look at the Q&A and hit the thumbs up if there's a question you particularly want answered. We're probably only going to have time for 2 or 3. So those that get voted to the top are the ones that we will answer first. Anything we don't get answered, I will ask Linda to just put together a few answers to things that she feels well positioned to, and we'll share that later as a bit of follow-up. So let's just pop your questions in, vote them up. We'll give it a couple of minutes. While we're doing that, there were a couple of things I noticed in the chat that people had offered.
I'm too scared to click anything, right? Because when
don't touch it.
When you went mute, I'm not touching it. So you read out what the questions are, because I'm going
to be Quizmaster. I'll be Quizmaster. What else we got? We've got a few comments here. I think someone put one about having, Andrea said awareness days could be used to educate men in the workplace. Absolutely. All of these talks, all of these things should be open to everybody. Men work with these people, live with these people. They have their own journey.
They have, and they love knowing about our bodies. They actually do. They're fascinated. They're very confused, but so are we, and we live in the body, and we don't even know what's going on with it. So yeah, poor men. And it is nice to talk to them as well. And you'll be surprised how they're often more interested than you think. And if you can, sometimes we have to talk to them in a slightly different way than we might talk to women. But if you get the message in the right way, they're all keen to know how they can be helpful, or what they shouldn't say. So it's for everyone.
They want to help. They're just like a bit scared.
Yes.
And as I say to my husband / business partner, when I'm having a bad day, and he's like, "Oh, babe, I wish I could help. Looks like, it must be terrible." I'm like, "You should try being in it, man. It's a ride." All right, so let's have a look at some of the questions. First one we've got there is, where can we read more about the research? Is there a report or paper?
So I'm working on it, and there will be. So eventually, menosurvey.com, which is currently where you can access, it's where you can access the Australian survey, because that's still running, and it was where you could access this one. But the plan is to turn that into a website of its own, to have all the data in the different sections up there so people can see. And my clever husband said he's going to try and figure out if there's a way you can get it so you can almost manipulate it and ask a question yourself and say, "Oh, what about this age group? What was their symptom?"
Yeah.
I mean,
there'll be a chat GPT AI for that. There'll be a chat GPT.
Oh, but I'll have to use my husband. He wants to feel like special. I can't replace him with a machine.
Right.
Not yet.
Well, not yet. Not for everything. The other thing on this team is that Linda has a talk that she has put together for organisations around this, so to come in and speak to organisations to frame this information up and in a conversational style about what the information is telling us about what the opportunity is really to better inform and support. What do we got there? Charlotte's one's got 9 votes. Is there a move to educate and re-educate GPs on perimenopause in New Zealand? Why, yes. Linda, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, it's starting to happen, and I'm keen to be part of that happening. So I'm sort of offering myself to do some teaching sessions. But really, I think what we need to start producing is some sort of more formal, and we're sort of talking, the Australian Menopause Society would hopefully get involved with that and give that a sort of stamp of approval, to be sort of like an AMS course, to become knowledgeable and certified in menopause care as a GP, or as any sort of doctor, really, a gynecologist, or anyone who works with women in some sense. And then maybe even try and get that out to more health practitioners who are not medical, as well. So, nurses are very interested in this as well, and can be really good at offering clinics and helping women figure out what's going on. And so
allied health professionals of all kinds, anyone who's seeing women in their practice in terms of their health and well-being, so that they know what's going on and can help women find their way to the right support based on things.
That's it. I think there needs to be the GP one. So, you know, because we need to get taught about HRT properly, because that's something that med school just clean forgot about. Because at that point, for a lot of us, when we were in med school then, it was a real no, you know. So we didn't get taught enough about HRT, and we didn't get taught enough about perimenopause, particularly.
No.
You know, that's the word that nobody's heard of and needs to have heard of, including us doctors. So there needs to be like the doctor course that's got all the, you know, how do we prescribe HRT? What's the whole thing about HRT? And then, for the allied health professionals who are not going to be prescribing HRT, but all the other stuff that we need to know about lifestyle and the symptoms to look out for, you know, this disguise, the perimenopause disguise, you know, being able to lift that up and say, oh, it's perimenopause, that's why you're tired, you know, or whatever. So to kind of to just take this mystery away from this life phase for everybody.
Yeah. So there's a question here from Liz. For those of us who are younger, how can we best support our colleagues through these stages? The first thing I would say, Liz, is it's coming for you. So it's not just about supporting colleagues. You know, this is part of the ageist thing. Prepare for your future self. The better you prepare for your future self by educating yourself around what to expect, making lifestyle changes up front, because actually the better our lifestyle is and our health is coming into this phase, with exceptions, obviously, the lower impact some of the symptoms are and the better able we are to navigate them. So first thing is educate and look after yourself. And the second thing is doing that will provide you with information so you can be more empathetic. And then just be curious and compassionate and supportive. Like Linda was saying, don't be afraid to use the word. You know, ask people how they're feeling. You know, if they start talking about it, be open, don't shut the conversation down, be curious and supportive. What other things would you add, Linda, to that? How can younger people support their colleagues, friends, mums, etc., who are going through this?
I think it's and as you said, it is about, if it's a young woman, it is about getting fit for it yourself as well, physically and emotionally kind of ready. And yet just knowing how hard it can be will make you more understanding. So by learning about it, you kind of automatically become more sympathetic and empathetic anyway, because when you look at all the symptoms a woman can possibly get, and when you show that to a man who goes, oh, I didn't know perimenopause could do that, you know, suddenly they go, oh God, yeah, this is more than just hot flushes and period problems. You know, this is affecting this woman's body and brain in pretty much every way you can think of. So as you say, for people who aren't there yet, it can be hard to get your head around. And as I said at the beginning, you know, I wouldn't have said 20 years ago, I'm going to be a menopause warrior, you know, I'm going to fight the flag. So it's hard to sometimes get your head around life phases that seem so far away from where you are in your life. But when you learn about it, by learning about it, you will be more sympathetic and supportive. It will just come naturally, probably, because you realize how crazy this ride can get for other people.
Now, there are a few questions here that are specific about HRT and what it can help with and dosage and things. So what I will do, just in the interest of time, is I'll pass those on to Linda, and she might choose to answer those if it's appropriate, because it's an individual thing with individual patients, obviously, individual women. But the one thing that is here that I do want to rest our attention on just before we wrap up is a question from Selena, which has been hit by a few people, which is, post-menopause, do we become superwomen? Is there light at the end of this 15-year tunnel? And I reckon, personally, what I would love to see is more post-menopausal women coming out and sharing what it's like on the other side, because it can feel like, far out, man, this is not very temporary and it's a bit arduous, etc. It's like, what is on the other side, you know, and be models for us and share the difference that it is, you know. I feel like there's a lot for women who are on the other side of this. There's a lot of shutting up and wanting us to shut up, because it's like they've been through it. and they just want it all to go away because they're of a generation perhaps where there is some of this weak and feeble woman thing, or they're in positions, they had to muscle through it, so we should. I don't know. I'd love to see more of it, because I reckon they're there. And I personally already feel a difference in terms of stepping into a wiser, stronger, more authentic, grounded, exciting version of myself and of life. And I'm still in perimenopause, but Linda, anything you'd say on that? Do we become superwomen?
I think so. Yes, this is a blossoming. This is us coming into the vintage. I mean, and I think you're right. It would be nicer to hear more from the other side, if you like, because those stories are out there as well. Obviously, my survey is probably going to highlight it's going to look more doom and gloom than
yeah,
it probably should or could do. But we have to be honest that there are some ugly parts to this, but it is this transformation as well. So I do, there are those stories, lots of stories of women who've come through it and are a better version of themselves again. After it, there is this growth, there is this finding who you really are and what really matters to you, and looking after yourself, putting yourself first, which is something women can find really difficult, and they go through their life, giving and giving. And for a lot of us, we get to a point where we say, well, I'm going to look after myself, and that's not selfish.
yeah.
So that can be, you can find your superpower, and your sense of who you are. So there is a happy ending, I think, definitely.
Here's to that, man.
Yeah.
So, team, I know we have 1 minute to go, and I'm all about on time finishes. So, for those of you who did have an HRT related question, I encourage you to hit Linda up either on her Menodoctor website or over on LinkedIn with a question, and she'll see if she can answer it for you. For those of you who joined us, thank you very much for making space. I hope you've found this a valuable use of an hour, and that you are feeling, as we said at the beginning, to feel a bit more relaxed, informed, hopefully inspired to do something for yourself or for others. The recording of this will be available in the Menopause Awareness and Action community on LinkedIn next week, and I'll send a link out to everyone who registered. I encourage you to go and check out the Menodoctor website, and I'll be sharing a link to that with you all in the follow-up message, so that you can learn a bit more about what they can offer in terms of personal services for people going through this, but also the corporate talk. And I guess finally, it's get the conversation started in your organisation, like in some small way, have a chat with someone. Our next pause for thought, if you would like to join us, will be on Tuesday, the 13th of June, 12 till 1. And we're going to have the team from KPMG New Zealand in talking about what they've done to begin elevating the conversation, providing more support, more education, and generally shifting the dial on menopause in their workplace for a key group of KPMG talent. So pop that in your diary now. Tuesday, the 13th of June, 12 p.m. There'll be information out for you to register for that toward the end of April, early May. All right. So thank you, team, from me and Linda.
Thanks,
you
guys.
are now free to go off into your afternoon. Thanks for joining us.